Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder why sometimes a small annoyance just ruins your day, and other times a huge problem barely even bothers you? Well, this new study might have a clue about how we deal with our feelings, and it turns out to reach a sweet spot for when we try to change how we feel. So, our feelings aren't always simple. Sometimes they're mild, sometimes they're super intense. And how we deal with them, our emotion regulation changes a lot. Researchers wanted to understand how things like how strong an emotion feels and how much control we think we have over it affect whether and how we try to manage our feelings. The big idea here is that maybe we don't just regulate more and more as our emotions get stronger. The researchers thought that we might not bother regulating really weak feelings because there's not much to change. And we might also stop regulating really strong feelings because they're just too much to handle. So they hypothesized that we're most likely to regulate emotions that are kind of in the middle, not too weak and not too strong. To test this, they got a bunch of adults, about 79 of them, to keep a daily diary for 60 days. Every evening, they'd report on the most intense negative feeling they had that day, how strong it felt, and how much control they thought they had over it. Then, they'd say which emotion regulation tricks they used. These tricks included things like distraction, where you try to think about something else, rumination, where you keep thinking about the bad feeling, reappraisal, which is like changing how you see the situation, expression, where you let your feelings out, suppression, where you hold back your feelings, and relaxation, to calm down. They collected over 2,900 daily reports. That's a lot of data about people's feelings and how they dealt with them. Now, for the interesting stuff, they found some things that made sense based on earlier research. For example, when people felt more intense emotions, or their emotions felt less controllable, they tended to use strategies like relaxation, attrition, and rumination more. This means when things got tough, they'd try to relax, let it out, or dwell on it. But here is where it gets really cool. They found evidence for those too little, too much patterns, especially for using suppression and reappraisal. It turns out people use these strategies the most when their emotions were of average intensity and controllability. Think about it, if a feeling is super weak, you might not bother trying to change it. If it's overwhelming, you might not have the energy or know how to actively change how you think about it. Like with reappraisal. Similarly, suppressing a feeling that's just barely there might be overkill, and suppressing a feeling that's absolutely crushing you might be impossible. So, it seems like suppression and reappraisal hit their stride with moderate emotional challenges. They also looked at something called strategy switching. This is when people change up the emotion regulation tricks they usually use. They found that when emotions were either really high or really low in intensity or controllability, people were more likely to switch to strategies they didn't usually use. This suggests that when we hit emotional extremes, we get flexible and try new tactics, maybe because our usual ones aren't cutting it. Now, like with any study, there are a few things to keep in mind. The researchers themselves pointed out that for some of their analyses, they didn't have quite enough data to be super confident about the results. Also, their participants were mostly young female university students, so we can't assume these findings apply to everyone everywhere. They also asked people to report on the most intense emotion of the day. While this helps make sure they were actually dealing with something significant, it might mean they missed out on understanding how people handle those smaller, everyday annoyances or maybe even the really mild feelings they thought might not get regulated. Another point is that they measured emotion characteristics and strategy use at the same time. This means it's a bit tricky to say for sure which came first. For example, if you successfully regulated an emotion, you might then feel like you had more control over it. It is a bit of a feedback loop. So, what's the big takeaway from all this? It's that when we think about how people manage their feelings, we really need to look beyond simple straight-line relationships. Our decisions about whether and how to regulate our emotions are way more complex. It's not just about more intense emotion equals more regulation. There is a sweet spot for how intense emotions need to be for us to actively try and change them, especially when using more effortful strategies like reappraisal or suppression. And when we hit emotional extremes, we get creative and switch things up. This research gives us a more nuanced picture of our inner emotional lives. It suggests that maybe we're not always trying to smooth out every single ripple, but more often dealing with the waves that are significant enough to notice but not so big that they pull us under. And when the unexpected happens, we tend to reach for different tools. This is fascinating stuff, and it really makes you think about your own emotional patterns. How do you feel about these findings? Do they resonate with your own experiences? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this dive into the science of feelings, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with a friend, and don't forget to subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more breakdowns of fascinating research. Until next time, stay curious.